Blood dripped onto frozen ground, and the forest went silent. Ren did not know how long she had been running. Her legs had stopped obeying her mind minutes ago, moving only from memory, from pure animal fear. Branches had torn her sleeves. A gash along her ribs soaked her shirt dark red. Somewhere behind her, something was still following, moving between the trees with a patience that terrified her more than speed ever could. She did not look back again. Looking back had cost her twice already, each time nearly ending with her on the ground. So she ran forward, toward a wall of mist she could not explain, toward land that felt different beneath her feet, colder, older, watched. She crossed an invisible line she could not see, and the world changed. The howling behind her stopped instantly, as if a door had been slammed shut on it. The air grew heavier, charged with something she had no name for, and then her strength left her all at once, her knees buckling, her body finally admitting how much blood she had lost. She fell forward onto a bed of dead leaves, and the last thing she saw before the darkness took her was a pair of golden eyes emerging from the trees ahead. Those eyes did not belong to her pursuers. They belonged to Cale Blackthorn. For 300 years, the men of the Blackthorn line had ruled as alpha kings, over more territory than any pack in living memory. They did not bow. They did not kneel. Kneeling was a mark of weakness, and weakness was something bred out of the Blackthorn wolves generation after generation, until the current king, Cale, was said to be the coldest and strongest of them all. His enemies feared him. His own pack rarely dared meet his eyes directly. He had built his reputation on control, on never once losing command of himself, not even in battle, not even in grief. So when his wolf reacted to the scent of a dying stranger by dropping low to the ground, ears flat, throat bared in submission, the two guards standing beside him froze in place, unsure if what they were seeing was real. Cale himself felt it before he understood it, a pull behind his ribs, sudden and violent, as though something inside him had been asleep for centuries and had just woken up screaming. His wolf did not simply notice the woman on the ground. It recognized her. It answered to her, the way it had never answered to anyone, not even to him. He fought the pull for exactly 3 seconds, then his knees hit the frozen earth beside her, and the Alpha King of Blackthorn territory knelt before a stranger for the first time in the history of his bloodline. "My king?" one of the guards said carefully, his voice unsteady. Cale did not answer right away. He was staring at the woman's face, pale and streaked with dirt, her breathing shallow but steady. Up close, there was nothing about her that explained the reaction tearing through him. She looked human, ordinary, even, apart from the blood soaking her side. And yet his wolf pressed against the inside of his chest, like it wanted out, like it wanted to protect this stranger, with a violence that startled him. "Get Elric," Cale said finally, his voice rough. "Now." The guard did not move fast enough for Cale's liking, so he added, in a tone that left no room for hesitation, "Now means immediately. If she dies before he arrives, you will answer for it." The threat was enough. The guard vanished into the trees, running harder than Cale had ever seen him run. Cale remained kneeling, one hand hovering over the woman's wound without touching it, his mind racing through explanations and rejecting every one of them. He had not been mated. He had never believed the old stories about fated bonds were anything more than folklore meant to comfort weaker wolves who needed an excuse for falling in love. He had spent centuries certain that no one, human or wolf, could ever pull rank over the instincts that made him a king. And now here he was, on his knees in the dirt, unable to look away from a woman he had never met. "Who are you?" he murmured, more to himself than to her, since she could not hear him. "What did you do to me?" She did not answer, of course. Her breathing hitched once, sharply, and Cale's hand moved before he decided to move it, resting gently against her uninjured shoulder, as though the contact alone might keep her tethered to the world. The healer, Elric, arrived faster than should have been possible for a man his age, his robes flapping behind him as he dropped to the ground on her other side. "Move your hand, my king," Elric said, already unpacking supplies from the bag slung over his shoulder. "Let me see the wound." Cale obeyed, though every part of him resisted the order, some deep and unfamiliar instinct screaming that he should be the one protecting her, not standing back and watching someone else do it. Elric worked quickly, cutting away fabric, cleaning the gash along her ribs with practiced hands. Kale watched every movement, his jaw tight, his wolf pacing restlessly beneath his skin. "The wound is not from claws," Elric said after a moment, frowning. "This is a blade, human-made, but sharpened with something else. There is a residue here I do not recognize." "Poison?" "Not exactly. More like a marker, something meant to track her perhaps, rather than kill her outright." Elric glanced up at him. "She was being hunted, my king, not by animals, by something that wanted her alive long enough to follow." Kale's wolf growled low in his chest at the word hunted, a sound that came out through his own throat before he could stop it. The guard standing nearby took an involuntary step back. "Will she live?" Kale asked, forcing his voice level again. "If the bleeding stops soon, yes, she is stronger than she looks." Elric paused, studying the woman's face for a moment, before adding carefully, "My king, may I ask what happened here? Why did you kneel?" Kale did not answer immediately. He did not have an answer that made sense, not one he was willing to say aloud yet, not until he understood it himself. "Finish treating her," he said instead. "Then bring her to the castle. She stays under guard until I say otherwise." "Under guard, or under protection?" Elric asked, his tone careful, testing. Kale's eyes flicked toward the tree line where the mist still curled thick between the trees, where whatever had chased her here might still be watching from beyond the border. "Both," he said. By the time they reached the castle gates, word had already begun to spread through the pack, carried faster than any messenger could run. Whispers followed Kale down every hallway as his men carried the unconscious woman inside. Servants paused mid-task to stare. Guards exchanged glances they thought went unnoticed. An Alpha King who had knelt. It should have been impossible. It should have been a rumor easily dismissed. But too many witnesses had seen it happen, and rumors that came from a king's own guard carried weight no one could ignore. Kale's sister, Isolde, met him in the corridor outside the healing chambers, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable in the particular way that meant she was furious and trying not to show it. "Tell me it is not true," she said without preamble. "I do not know what you heard," Kale replied, not slowing his pace. "I heard that my brother, the Alpha King of Blackthorn, dropped to his knees in front of a bleeding stranger in the middle of the forest, in front of 2 of his own guards." Isolde fell into step beside him, her voice dropping lower. "Tell me that is not what happened." Kale did not answer. His silence was answer enough. Isolde exhaled sharply, running a hand through her dark hair. "Kale, do you understand what this looks like? 300 years, and not one king in our line has ever knelt to anyone, not to an enemy alpha begging for mercy, not to a queen offering alliance. Nothing has ever brought a Blackthorn king to his knees, and now you are telling me a woman none of us have ever seen did it without even being conscious?" "I am not telling you anything," Kale said, "because I do not have an explanation yet." "Then find one," Isolde said, quickly, "because if this spreads the way these things spread, every rival pack within 100 miles is going to hear that the Blackthorn King has a weakness. And weaknesses get tested, Kale. You know that better than anyone." She was not wrong, and that was what unsettled him most. He had spent his entire reign making certain no one could find a crack in his armor, no soft place to press when they wanted leverage. And now, in the space of a single afternoon, an unconscious stranger had exposed something in him that even he did not understand. "I need to see her again," Kale said, more to himself than to Isolde, and continued down the corridor without waiting for a reply. The healing chamber was quiet when he entered, lit only by a low fire and a single lantern near the bed. Elric had finished his work. Clean bandages wrapped around the woman's ribs, and her breathing had steadied into something closer to natural sleep than the shallow gasping from before. Kale stood at the foot of the bed for a long moment, simply watching her, trying to understand what it was about this particular face, this particular scent, that had undone 300 years of discipline in a matter of seconds. She looked ordinary. That was the strangest part. No mark of nobility, no scent of power, nothing that should have registered as significant to a wolf as controlled as his, and yet every instinct in him insisted otherwise, insisted that she mattered in a way nothing else in his long life had mattered. "Who are you?" he said again, quietly, the question different this time, less confused and more determined. He intended to find out, whatever she was, whatever had happened to bring her bleeding across his border with unknown hunters on her trail. He intended to uncover every piece of it, starting the moment she opened her eyes. Outside, the mist along the border had not lifted. If anything, it had grown thicker as the hours passed, curling low across the ground, like something waiting. Something that had followed her scent this far, and had no intention of losing it now. Wren woke to unfamiliar warmth and the smell of wood smoke. For a moment, she did not move, did not open her eyes fully, only listened. A fire crackled somewhere nearby. Fabric rustled, footsteps crossed a stone floor, and beneath it all, she felt a dull ache along her ribs that told her, before her memory did, that something terrible had happened to her. Then it came back in fragments. The forest, the running, the shape following her through the trees, never quite catching her, never quite letting her go. She remembered falling. She remembered golden eyes. Her own eyes opened. The room was nothing like anything she recognized. Stone walls, tall windows framed in dark wood, a fire burning low in a hearth large enough to stand inside. The bed beneath her was soft, layered with blankets far finer than anything she owned. For a disoriented second she wondered if she had died, and this was some strange version of afterward. Then a voice spoke from near the window, low and controlled. "You are awake." She turned her head and found a man standing there, watching her with an intensity that made her pulse jump before her mind caught up to why. He was tall, dressed simply but well, his dark hair pushed back from a face that looked carved rather than merely handsome. But it was his eyes that held her attention, a pale gold that seemed to catch the firelight strangely, the way an animal's eyes might. "Where am I?" she managed, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Safe," he said. "For now, that should be enough of an answer." It is not. She tried to sit up, and immediately regretted it, pain flaring sharp along her side. The man crossed the room before she even registered him moving, one hand steadying her shoulder, with surprising gentleness, for someone who looked like he could break stone with his bare hands. "Do not move too quickly," he said. "The wound is healing, but it is not healed." "Who are you?" she asked, ignoring the instruction and trying to sit up anyway, though slower this time. "My name is Kale." He hesitated, as though considering how much else to say. "This is my home. My men found you unconscious, at the edge of my land, wounded and alone. You have been here 3 days. 3 days. The number hit her harder than she expected. 3 days of nothing, of no memory, while somewhere out there, whatever had chased her might still be searching. "I do not remember how I got hurt," she admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. "I remember running. I remember something behind me. After that, nothing." Something shifted in Kale's expression, something she could not quite name. Concern, maybe, or calculation, or both at once. "What is your name?" "Wren," she said, and then paused, because even that felt uncertain now, a fact she was no longer entirely sure of. "I think. Wren. Yes. Wren," he repeated, as if testing the shape of it. Something about the way he said her name made her stomach tighten in a way she did not understand and was too tired to examine closely. A woman entered then, dark-haired and sharp-eyed, carrying a tray of food that smelled better than anything Wren remembered eating in longer than 3 days. The woman's gaze moved between Wren and Kale with obvious curiosity, though she said nothing, only set the tray down carefully on the table beside the bed. "Thank you," Wren said, and the woman offered a small, unreadable smile before glancing at Kale and slipping back out of the room. "Who was that?" Wren asked, once the door closed. "My sister. I sold." She looked at me, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Kyle's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You have no idea." Wren studied him for a long moment, taking in details she had missed at first, the way the guards outside the door had bowed their heads slightly when he passed, the way even his sister had deferred to him without a word being exchanged. This was not simply a wealthy man who happened to find her in the woods. There was authority here, deep and absolute, the kind that came from more than money or title. "You are important," she said slowly, "aren't you?" "I am the lord of this land," he said, which was true, in its way, even if it left out an enormous portion of what that meant. "And this land is where, exactly?" "Far from wherever you came from, I suspect," he he said, deflecting smoothly. Do you remember anything about your life before the forest? A home, a family, work you did? Ren opened her mouth to answer and found, to her growing horror, that she could not. She reached for memories that should have been there, memories of a childhood, of parents, of a place she called home, and found only fog, thick and impenetrable, where those things should have lived. I don't, she whispered, panic beginning to creep into her voice. I don't remember anything. Just the forest. Just running. Her breathing quickened, her hands beginning to shake against the blankets. Why can't I remember anything? Cale was beside her again before she finished speaking, his hand closing around hers with a steadiness that, despite everything, helped slow her racing heart. You are safe here, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her believe it, despite every rational reason not to trust a stranger in an unfamiliar castle. Whatever happened to you, whatever you cannot remember, you do not have to face it alone, not while you are under my protection. You don't even know me, she said, though her fingers curled around his without her permission. No, he agreed quietly. I don't, and yet. He did not finish the sentence, and Ren did not ask him to, though something in the unfinished words settled strangely warm in her chest, a feeling she had no explanation for, and, for the moment, no energy left to question. Elsewhere in the castle, in a room far removed from the warmth of the fire, and the careful gentleness Cale showed the woman he could not explain his devotion to, Isolde paced in front of Dorian, the Pax Beta, a broad-shouldered man with a scar along his jaw, and a reputation for saying exactly what he thought regardless of consequence. He has not left her side in 3 days, Isolde said, not once. He has cancelled 2 council meetings. 2, Dorian. Do you understand how unlike him that is? I understand it well enough, Dorian said, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. The question is what we do about it. We do nothing rash, Isolde said. Not yet. If this is what the old stories describe, if this truly is a fated bond, then we cannot interfere without risking permanent damage to him. But if it is not, if this woman is something else entirely, something sent to weaken him deliberately, then we need to know before it goes any further. You think someone sent her? I think a wounded woman does not simply wander across our border by accident, marked with a blade coated in something Elric cannot identify, at the exact moment our king's wolf decides to abandon 3 centuries of pride. Isolde's voice was sharp with suspicion. That is either the greatest coincidence in Blackthorn history, or it is not a coincidence at all. Dorian considered this for a long moment. Elric mentioned something else, her blood. What about it? He ran tests while she was unconscious. Standard procedure for an unidentified wolf, found near the border. Dorian's expression darkened. Her blood is not fully human, Isolde. There is a trace in it, old and faint, but unmistakable once you know what to look for. Isolde went still. What kind of trace? Royal bloodline markers, the same markers found in the old records, the ones describing the lines that were wiped out generations ago during the wars between the northern packs. Dorian lowered his voice, though there was no one nearby to overhear. If Elric is right, this woman is descended from a bloodline everyone believed extinct, and she has no idea what she is. Isolde absorbed this in silence, her mind working quickly through the implications. A hidden bloodline, a king's instinctive submission, a wound designed to track rather than kill. Does Cale know? She asked finally. Not yet. Elric wanted to confirm the results before bringing it to him. Confirm them quickly, Isolde said, because if I am right about who might have marked her, we are not dealing with an accident. We are dealing with someone who has been hunting this bloodline deliberately, and who now knows exactly where the last piece of it has ended up. Back in the healing chamber, unaware of the conversation unfolding elsewhere in the castle, Ren finally allowed herself to eat, her strength slowly returning under Cale's watchful presence. She still remembered nothing beyond the forest, still felt the frightening blankness where her past should have been. But sitting there, in a warmth she could not explain, and beside a man whose steadiness felt oddly, impossibly familiar, she found the panic receding just enough to let her breathe. Whoever she had been before, whatever she had lost, some instinct, deep inside her, insisted that she had found something here worth holding on to. She only wished she understood why. 10 days passed before Ren was strong enough to walk the castle halls on her own, And in that time, she noticed everything. She noticed the way conversations paused when she entered a room, then resumed at a different pace, as though people were choosing their words more carefully around her than they would with a stranger who was simply a stranger. She noticed the guards outside her door were never the same two twice, rotating in shifts that felt more like careful assignment than routine duty. She noticed that no one, not the servants, not Isolde, not even Kale, ever quite answered her direct questions about where she truly was. She noticed her own body changing too, in ways she could not explain to anyone, least of all herself. It started small. A door creaked, 2 floors away, and she heard it as clearly as if it had creaked beside her ear. She caught the scent of bread baking in a kitchen she had never visited, could tell the difference between the servant who wore lavender oil and the one who wore rosemary, long before either of them entered a room. Her senses had sharpened in ways that felt less like recovery and more like transformation, and no one around her seemed the least bit surprised by it, which unsettled her more than the changes themselves. Then there were the dreams. They came every night, vivid and strange, full of running through dark trees on legs that were not quite legs, seeing the world through eyes that caught colors differently than her own. In the dreams she was fast, faster than any human had a right to be, and free, in a way that felt like memory rather than imagination, though she was certain she had never run on 4 legs in her life. She woke from one such dream on the 11th morning with her heart pounding and a question she could no longer avoid asking. She found Kale in a study near the eastern wing, bent over a stack of papers with the particular focus of a man trying to distract himself from something else entirely. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened the moment he saw her standing steadier on her feet than she had been days before. "You should be resting," he said. "I have been resting for 11 days, Ren replied, closing the door behind her with more force than strictly necessary. "I want answers instead." Kale set down his pen slowly. "What kind of answers?" "The kind you have been avoiding since the moment I woke up." She crossed the room and stood in front of his desk, arms folded, refusing to be deflected again. "I hear things I should not be able to hear. I smell things from rooms away. I have dreams about running through forests as something that is not human. And every single person in this castle acts like none of that is strange at all. So either I am losing my mind, or there is something you have not told me." Kale was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression she was beginning to recognize as the look he wore when weighing how much truth a situation could bear. "Sit down," he said finally. "I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me what is happening to me." "Ren." Her name in his voice carried a weight that made her pause despite herself. "What I am about to tell you will sound impossible. I need you to listen to all of it before you decide I am lying, or mad, or dangerous." Something in his tone, careful and deliberate, made the panic she had been holding at bay all morning tighten in her chest. She sat, finally, in the chair across from his desk, her hands pressed flat against her knees to keep them from shaking. "Say it," she said. Kale rose from his seat, walking to the window rather than facing her directly, as though it would be easier for both of them if he did not watch her reaction unfold in real time. "This land is not ruled by ordinary lords," he began. "It is ruled by packs, families with bloodlines that carry an ability most of the world outside these borders does not know exists. The ability to become something other than human, a wolf, in the truest sense, not metaphorically." Ren opened her mouth to laugh, to dismiss it as some elaborate joke, but the sound died in her throat before it formed, because some deep instinctive part of her recognized the truth in his words, even as her rational mind rejected them entirely. "I am the leader of one such pack," Kale continued. "What outsiders would call an alpha king. My guards, my sister, everyone you have met in this castle, all of them share this ability. It is why no one here reacted strangely to your heightened senses, your dreams, because they recognized what you likely are before you did." "Before I did," Ren repeated slowly. "You are saying I am one of you." "I am saying it is very likely, yes." Kale turned back to face her now, his expression careful, watching for the moment her control might shatter entirely. "Elric, our healer, found traces in your blood consistent with an old bloodline, a powerful one, believed extinct for generations. It would explain everything, the senses, the dreams, and perhaps even why you were being hunted before you crossed into my territory." The word hunted landed like a physical blow. "Hunted," she echoed. "You think someone was trying to kill me because of what I am?" "Not kill," Kale said carefully. "The wound Elric treated was not meant to end your life. It carried a marker, something designed to track rather than harm. Whoever did this to you wanted you alive, which suggests they wanted something from you, or from your bloodline, badly enough to hunt you across unfamiliar territory to get it." Ren sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb information that rewrote everything she thought she understood about herself, about the world, in the space of a few sentences. Wolves, bloodlines, hunters who wanted her alive, for reasons she could not begin to guess. "Show me," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever you are, show me, so I know you are not simply telling me stories to explain away things you don't want to admit are strange." Kale hesitated, and for a moment, Ren thought he might refuse. Then something shifted in his posture, a kind of resolve settling over him. "Not here," he said. "Follow me." He led her through corridors she had not yet explored, down a narrow staircase that ended at a heavy door opening, onto a private courtyard, enclosed by high stone walls, open to the sky above, but hidden from any view beyond the castle itself. The air outside was cold and sharp, carrying the faint scent of pine from somewhere beyond the walls. "No one else needs to see this," Kale said, closing the door behind them. "Not yet." Ren stood at the center of the courtyard, watching as Kale stepped back several paces, his expression settling into something calm and focused, the look of a man about to do something he had done 1,000 times before but never quite like this, never for an audience whose reaction mattered so much. What happened next defied every law of nature Ren had ever believed governed the world. Kale's body did not simply change, it transformed with a fluidity that seemed impossible, bones shifting, form reshaping, the man before her folding down and outward into something entirely different within the space of a few breaths. Where a moment ago there had been a man in dark clothing, there now stood a wolf, easily the size of a small horse, its fur a deep charcoal black, its eyes the same pale gold that had watched over her since the moment she woke in his castle. Ren's breath caught, terror and awe warring inside her chest in equal measure. The wolf did not approach immediately, standing still, watching her with an intensity that felt, impossibly, still like Kale, despite the entirely different form. "It's really you," she whispered, and the wolf's ears flicked toward her voice, a small, almost human gesture of acknowledgement. She took a step closer, then another, some instinct overriding the fear that should have kept her rooted in place. When she was close enough, she reached out a trembling hand and rested it against the thick fur of his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat beneath her palm. "I'm not afraid," she said, and realized as she said it that it was true. The wolf lowered its head slightly, pressing into her hand with something that felt distinctly like relief, and then, without warning, something shifted inside Ren herself. A heat spread through her veins, sudden and overwhelming, her vision sharpening at the edges, her bones aching in a way that felt less like pain and more like pressure building toward release. She staggered back, gasping, one hand pressed to her chest as the sensation intensified. "Ren?" Kale's voice, human again, alarmed, though she was too disoriented to register when exactly he had shifted back. "Something's happening," she managed, her voice strained. "I don't know what's happening to me." "Let it happen," Kale said quickly, closing the distance between them. "Don't fight it. Whatever you are, your body has been carrying this longer than you knew. Let it come." Ren closed her eyes, and for the first time in her life, or at least the only life she could remember, she stopped fighting the feeling clawing beneath her skin, and let it take her completely. The transformation was nothing like Kale's had been, where his had been smooth, practiced, emotion refined over centuries. Ren's first shift tore through her like a storm breaking loose after being trapped too long beneath the surface. She fell to her knees in the courtyard, every muscle in her body burning, her vision blurring between two entirely different ways of seeing the world. She heard herself cry out, though the sound that left her throat did not sound entirely human by the end of it. Kale did not move to stop it. He crouched beside her, close enough to help if she needed him, far enough not to interfere with a process that had to run its course on its own. "You're doing well," he said, his voice low and steady, an anchor in the chaos. Almost there. Let it finish. When it was over, when the storm inside her finally quieted, Wren opened her eyes to find the world rendered in colors and shadows she had never perceived before. Low to the ground, the stone courtyard suddenly enormous around her. She looked down and found not hands but paws, silver-furred and unfamiliar, and somewhere in the strange doubled awareness of the moment, she understood that she had become exactly what Cale had shown her minutes before. A wolf. Smaller than his, lighter in build, her coat a pale silver that seemed to catch what little light filtered into the courtyard and hold it. Cale's wolf form settled beside her, close but respectful, watching her adjust to a body that was entirely new, and yet felt, in some strange way, like coming home to something she had always been meant to be. It took her the better part of an hour to shift back, and by the time she did, exhausted and shaking but strangely elated, Cale had wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and was watching her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Something unguarded, something that looked almost like wonder. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I finally understand something about myself I didn't know was missing," Wren admitted. Terrified, and a little bit incredible, honestly. A faint, genuine smile crossed his face, the first she had seen from him without any trace of careful control behind it. That is usually how it goes, the first time. Word of what had happened in the private courtyard did not stay contained for long. Not in a castle full of wolves whose senses were as sharp as Wren's own now were. By the following morning, the news had spread through every level of the household, whispered between servants, discussed openly among the guards, debated in low, urgent tones among Cale's inner circle. Isolde found Cale in the great hall shortly after breakfast, her expression unreadable as she fell into step beside him. "She shifted," Isolde said without preamble. "Confirmed then, she truly is one of us." "She is," Cale said. "And the bloodline markers Elric found, have you told her what they mean?" "Not yet." Cale's jaw tightened slightly. "She has absorbed enough in the last 2 weeks. I intend to give her time before adding the weight of an entire ancient legacy to it." "Time is a luxury we may not have," Isolde said quietly. "Dorian has been asking questions among the border scouts. 2 of them reported strange scent trails near the eastern boundary 3 nights ago. Wolves not belonging to any pack we recognize, moving carefully, deliberately, the way trained hunters move, rather than wanderers who lost their way." Cale stopped walking. "Ashgrave. We cannot be certain yet, but if her bloodline is what Elric believes it to be, and if someone marked her deliberately before she crossed into our territory, then whoever did it knows exactly where she ended up. It would not take a genius to guess who might want a bloodline like hers, and what they might be willing to do to claim it. The Ashgrave pack had been a thorn in Blackthorn territory for over a generation, led by an alpha named Cassian whose ambitions had never been secret. Where the Blackthorn line ruled through strength, tempered by law and tradition, the Ashgrave pack ruled through fear, and had spent decades attempting to expand their borders through whatever means proved most effective, including, according to old rumors Cale had never fully credited until now, the deliberate hunting of rare bloodlines believed to carry unusual power. "If Cassian is behind this," Cale said slowly, "then Wren did not simply wander into my territory by chance. She was running from something specific, something that knew what she was, and wanted her captured rather than killed. Which means he will not simply give up because she happened to cross onto Blackthorn land," Isolde finished. "He will come for her eventually. The only question is when, and how prepared we will be when he does." Cale's expression hardened into the calculating focus that had made him such an effective leader for so many years, the softness from the courtyard replaced entirely by something colder, more strategic. "Double the border patrols. I want eyes on every approach into our territory, day and night. And find out everything you can about what Cassian has been doing these last few months. If he is planning something, I want to know before he acts, not after." "And Wren?" Cale's expression flickered, just briefly, before settling back into resolve. "I will tell her what we suspect. She deserves to know the danger she is in, but I will not let it happen to her the way it nearly did in that forest. Not while she is under my protection." Isolde studied her brother for a long moment, something knowing in her gaze. "You have changed in the last 2 weeks, Cale. I am not certain you realize how much." "I am aware," he said simply. and left it at that. Ren found him later that evening, in the same study, where he had first told her the truth about what he was, and something in his expression, when he looked up, told her immediately that more news, none of it good, was coming. "You look like a man about to deliver bad news," she said, settling into the chair across from him, with more confidence than she had felt weeks ago, before her body had learned what it truly was. "Perceptive," Cale said, and then, without further preamble, told her everything Isolde had shared, the border scouts, the unfamiliar scent trails, the suspicion that fell squarely on a rival pack whose ambitions had never been secret. Ren listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail, until finally she asked the question that mattered most. "You think this Cassian is the one who hunted me, marked me, sent whatever chased me through that forest?" "I believe it is likely, yes." "Why me, though? What could my bloodline possibly offer him that would be worth this much effort?" Cale hesitated, and Ren recognized the hesitation immediately for what it was. "There is more you deserve to know," he said finally, "about the bloodline Elric identified in your blood. It is not simply rare. It is a line believed connected, generations ago, to some of the oldest and most powerful royal wolves in our history. If Cassian believes reuniting that bloodline with power like mine could shift the balance of who holds authority across these territories, he would have every reason to want you under his control rather than mine." The weight of that settled over Ren slowly, the understanding that she was not simply caught in the middle of an old rivalry but was, herself, the prize both sides believed they needed to secure. "So, I am not just running from danger," she said quietly. "I am the reason for it." "You are not the reason for Cassian's ambitions," Cale said, his voice firm. "He would have found some path toward the power he wants eventually, with or without you. But yes, right now, you are a piece he believes he needs, and that makes you a target, regardless of what either of us wishes were true." Ren absorbed this in silence for a long moment, and then, to Cale's evident surprise, she squared her shoulders and met his eyes, with a steadiness that had not been there when she first woke in his castle 2 weeks ago. "Then teach me," she said. "Whatever this bloodline means, whatever power it supposedly carries, I want to understand it. I am not interested in being anyone's prize, Cale. Not his, and not yours either, no matter how much your wolf apparently likes the smell of my blood." Something in Cale's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise giving way to something closer to respect. "That," he said, "is exactly the answer I was hoping you would give." Training began the following morning, before the sun had fully cleared the eastern hills. Cale led Ren back to the private courtyard, this time accompanied by Dorian, whose broad shoulders and quiet, assessing gaze made Ren feel like she was being measured for something the moment he looked at her. "This is Dorian," Cale said, "my beta, and the best combat trainer in this territory. If you are going to defend yourself, you need more than instinct. You need discipline." Dorian inclined his head toward her, not quite a bow, something closer to acknowledgement between equals. "Cale tells me you shifted cleanly on your first attempt. That is rare. Most wolves need days of preparation before their bodies manage at once." "I didn't feel like it was clean," Ren admitted. "It felt like being torn apart and put back together in the wrong order." A faint, unexpected smile crossed Dorian's face. "That is what clean feels like, the first time. Trust me, you do not want to see what it looks like when it goes badly." Over the following days, Ren's world narrowed into a rhythm of exhausting, exhilarating work. Dorian taught her to control her shift, to move fluidly between forms, rather than being overwhelmed by the transition each time. He taught her the basics of movement in her wolf form, how to read the ground beneath her paws, how to use speed and low posture rather than brute strength, since her build, lighter than most trained fighters in the pack, would never win a contest of raw power. Cale watched more often than he participated directly, though on the days he did join the training, Ren found herself pushing harder, moving faster, some instinctive part of her wanting to prove herself worthy of the protection he had extended so completely from the very first moment. "You favor your right side," Cale observed one afternoon, circling her slowly, as she caught her breath after a sparring exercise that had left her thoroughly outmatched by one of the younger pack fighters. "Every time you feel threatened, you turn to protect it." "Why?" Ren frowned, considering the observation. "I don't know. I hadn't noticed. Old injury, perhaps, something from before the memories you lost. Kale's expression softened slightly. Your body remembers things your mind cannot access yet. Pay attention to what it tells you. It may know more than you think. That evening, exhausted but restless, Ren found herself walking the castle grounds alone, drawn toward the eastern wall where the border patrols kept their watch. The mist that had followed her across the boundary weeks ago had never fully lifted, curling low along the tree line even now, and something about it pulled at a memory she could not quite reach. She was still staring at the mist when Isolde approached, falling into step beside her without invitation. "You have been avoiding me," Isolde said, not unkindly, more as an observation than an accusation. "I didn't realize I was," Ren said honestly. "I think I have simply been trying not to drown in everything I've learned in the last month." "Understandable." Isolde studied her for a long moment, the same assessing look Ren had grown accustomed to from every member of Kale's inner circle. "I owe you an apology, I think. When you first arrived, I suspected you of being sent here deliberately, a weapon aimed at my brother rather than a woman genuinely in danger. And now? Now I have watched you train, until your body shook with exhaustion rather than giving up. I have watched you ask for the truth, rather than flinching from it. Whatever you were sent here to be, if you were sent here at all, you have chosen something else entirely since arriving." Isolde's expression, usually guarded, softened slightly. "That matters. To a pack like ours. Perhaps more than bloodline does." Ren felt something loosen in her chest at the words, a tension she had not fully realized she was carrying. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you probably realize." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the mist curl along the border, before Isolde spoke again, her tone shifting back toward business. "Dorian tells me your control is improving faster than expected. Kale believes you may be ready for supervised patrol within the week." "Patrol," Ren repeated, as in, actively defending the border, rather than just training away from it. "Kale would prefer you remain within the castle walls indefinitely, if it were entirely his choice," Isolde said, a faint, knowing smile touching her lips. "But I suspect you would refuse that arrangement rather forcefully." "You suspect correctly." 3 nights later, that suspicion proved prophetic, in a way none of them expected. Ren was walking the inner courtyard alone, unable to sleep, her mind turning over everything she had learned in the past weeks, when a commotion near the eastern gate shattered the quiet. Shouts rose from the border, urgent and sharp, followed by the distinctive howl of an alarm call, a sound every member of the pack had been trained since childhood to recognize instantly. She was running toward the gate before conscious thought caught up with instinct, arriving just as Kale burst from the castle doors behind her, already shirtless, his shift beginning, before he had even cleared the threshold. "Scouting party," one of the border guards called out, breathless, blood streaking down one arm from a wound that had clearly come from claws rather than a blade. 3 of them, maybe 4. They came from the east, moving fast, testing our patrol strength before pulling back. "Ashgrave?" Kale demanded, his voice already carrying the low growl that signaled his wolf pressing close beneath the surface. "They're sent, yes, no mistaking it." Kale's expression darkened into something Ren had not seen from him before, cold and dangerous, in a way that made her understand, viscerally, exactly why no rival pack dared test Blackthorn borders lightly. "Retreated across the boundary, my king, but they were careful, deliberate. This did not feel like a raid meant to cause damage. It felt like they were counting our numbers, mapping our patrol routes." "Reconnaissance," Kale said grimly. "They are preparing for something larger." Ren stepped forward before she quite decided to, her voice steadier than she expected given the fear coiling tight in her stomach. "They were looking for me, weren't they?" Kale turned to her, and for a moment, the fierce, commanding expression softened just slightly, enough for her to see the worry beneath it. "It is likely, yes. A scouting party, testing our defenses, days after we increased border patrols, is not a coincidence." "Then I should be part of the response," Ren said, "not hidden away in the castle, while everyone else risks themselves because of what I might be worth to Cassian." "Ren, you told me yourself I am strong enough to be trained. Dorian says my control is improving faster than expected. If Cassian is going to come for me eventually, I would rather be able to defend myself than hide behind walls and hope your patrols catch every threat before it reaches me." Kale studied her for a long moment, and Ren watched the internal battle play out clearly across his features, the protective instinct that wanted to lock her safely away, warring against the respect he clearly held for her determination. "Not tonight," he said finally. "Tonight, the border patrols handle this alone, because you are not yet ready for a confrontation with trained fighters who have likely been hunting bloodlines like yours for years. But soon, if your training continues at this pace, I will not stand in your way." It was not everything Ren wanted to hear, but it was enough. A promise rather than a dismissal, and she found herself nodding, accepting the compromise, even as her heart continued to race from the adrenaline of the alarm. As Kale turned to organize the response with Dorian and the border guards, Ren remained near the gate, staring east, toward the mist where the scouting party had vanished, a cold certainty settling over her that this had only been the beginning. Whatever Cassian was planning, it was coming, and soon. The days following the scouting party's retreat passed in a tense, watchful rhythm, the entire castle operating with a heightened awareness that had not existed before the alarm sounded at the eastern gate. Kale doubled the border patrols again, this time permanently, and called a full council meeting for the first time in months, gathering every senior member of the Blackthorn pack into the Great Hall to discuss what everyone now understood to be an approaching threat, rather than a hypothetical one. Ren was not invited to that first meeting, a decision that stung more than she expected, though she understood the reasoning even as it frustrated her. She was still new, still unproven in the eyes of pack members who had spent their entire lives earning the trust Kale and Isolde now extended to her freely. She resolved, quietly, to change that. Her training intensified over the following 2 weeks, Dorian pushing her harder each day, testing not just her physical control, but her instincts under pressure, staging mock confrontations designed to simulate the chaos of a real conflict, rather than the controlled environment of simple drills. "You think too much," Dorian told her one afternoon, after she had hesitated a half-second too long during a sparring exercise, and found herself pinned before she registered the opening that had cost her the advantage. "Your wolf knows what to do faster than your mind does. Trust it more." "Easy for you to say," Ren muttered, catching her breath. "You've had centuries of practice trusting your instincts." "I have had decades, not centuries," Dorian corrected, offering a hand to help her up. "But yes, more practice than you. It will come, though. I have trained enough new wolves to recognize when someone has the instinct buried beneath uncertainty, rather than lacking it entirely." "You have it, Ren. You simply need to stop questioning it long enough to let it work." It was during one of these training sessions, weeks into her recovery and education, that Ren first proved herself in a way that changed how the pack saw her entirely. A group of younger pack members, children too young to shift reliably, had been playing near the training grounds when a hawk, startled by the noise of the sparring match, dove unexpectedly toward the courtyard, talons extended, mistaking the smallest child for prey in the chaotic movement of the yard. Ren moved before anyone else registered the danger, closing the distance between herself and the child in a burst of speed that surprised even Dorian, shifting mid-stride into her wolf form and placing herself bodily between the hawk's dive and the terrified child, taking a shallow scratch along her shoulder that would have struck the boy's face instead. The hawk, startled by the sudden appearance of a wolf where a moment before there had been only open ground, wheeled away and vanished over the tree line, leaving the courtyard in stunned silence, broken only by the child's frightened sobbing and the low, protective growl still rumbling in Ren's throat as she shifted back, gathering the boy into her arms without a second thought. Word of the incident reached Kale within the hour, and by evening it had reached every corner of the castle, told and retold, with the particular reverence pack members reserved for stories that revealed character rather than simply strength. "You did not have to intervene yourself," Kale said that night, examining the shallow scratch along her shoulder with careful, gentle hands, his expression a complicated mixture of pride and lingering worry. "There were trained fighters closer to the children than you were." "There wasn't time to calculate who was closest," Ren said. "I just moved." "That," Kale said quietly, "is exactly what Dorian has been trying to teach you these past weeks, and you did it perfectly, without even realizing it, the moment it actually mattered." Isolde, standing nearby, offered Ren a look of open respect that had been building steadily over the past month, but crystallized fully in that moment. "The boy's mother is a senior member of our hunting party," she said. She has already spoken to half the household about what you did. Whatever hesitation remained among the pack about trusting an outsider, I suspect it ended today. The shift in how the pack regarded Ren was subtle but unmistakable over the following days. Guards who had once watched her with wary curiosity now offered genuine greetings when she passed. Servants who had kept careful, polite distance began including her in easy conversation. Even the senior pack members who had questioned Kale's judgment most sharply in private council meetings found their skepticism softening in the face of a woman who had thrown herself, without hesitation, between danger and a child who was not even her own kin. Kale noticed the change too, and something in his own demeanor shifted alongside it. The careful restraint he had maintained since the day she woke in his castle beginning, slowly, to give way to something warmer, less guarded. It was on a quiet evening, 2 weeks after the incident with the hawk, the two of them walking the same eastern wall where the alarm had once sounded, that Kale finally spoke the words he had clearly been holding back since the moment his wolf first knelt in that forest. "I need to tell you something," he said, stopping at the wall's edge, the mist along the border finally beginning to thin as the season shifted toward winter. "About why my wolf reacted the way it did when we first found you." Ren turned to face him fully, something in his tone telling her this was different from every conversation they had shared before. "I'm listening." "There is an old belief among wolves like us," Kale said slowly, choosing each word with obvious care. "A bond some call fated, rare enough that most of my generation dismissed it as legend, rather than genuine possibility. It is said that when a wolf encounters the one person meant to stand as their equal, their true partner in every sense, their instincts recognize it before their mind can, sometimes violently, sometimes in ways that override centuries of trained behavior." Ren's breath caught. "Kneeling," she said quietly. "You think that's what happened? When you found me." "I know it is what happened," Kale said, his voice rough with an honesty that cost him something to offer so plainly. "I fought the explanation for weeks, told myself it was coincidence, some reaction to your bloodline, rather than to you specifically. But I do not believe that anymore, Ren. I have not believed it for some time." The silence between them stretched, charged with everything neither of them had said aloud in the 2 months since she had collapsed at his border, bleeding and afraid. "I don't remember who I was before that forest," Ren said finally, her voice unsteady. "I don't know what kind of person I used to be, what I wanted, who I loved, but I know who I am now. I know that every single day since I woke in your castle, I have trusted you more than I understand how to explain, and I know that when I think about what happens after Cassian is dealt with, after this danger passes, I do not imagine leaving." Kale closed the distance between them slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished, though she did not move at all. "Then perhaps," he said quietly, "we do not need old legends to explain what we already know is true." Neither of them spoke again for a long moment, the mist finally clearing from the border behind them, the first genuine peace either had felt in weeks, settling gently over the space between them. Peace, when it came to territories bordering the Ashgrave pack, never lasted long. 3 weeks after the quiet moment on the eastern wall, a rider arrived at the Blackthorn gates at dawn, exhausted and grim-faced, carrying news from one of the outlying villages under Kale's protection. Ren was present when the report reached the Great Hall, standing now among the senior council members rather than waiting anxiously outside as she once had. "They struck the Fallow Creek settlement 2 nights ago," the rider reported, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "A dozen fighters, moving fast, demanding to know if anyone had seen a silver-furred wolf pass through the area in recent months. When the villagers refused to answer, they burned 2 grain stores before retreating." Kale's expression turned to stone. "Injuries?" "None fatal, my king. But the message was clear enough. They are not searching quietly anymore. They are willing to terrorize anyone who might have information, and they are running out of patience." Ren felt the weight of every eye in the room shift toward her, not with blame, but with the shared understanding that the danger circling their borders had a name and a face, and that face was hers. "This is my fault," she said quietly, once the rider had been dismissed to rest and the council had settled into the tense silence that followed such news. "They are terrorizing your people because of me. They are terrorizing our people because Cassian is a man who has never respected boundaries that inconvenience his ambitions. Isolde said firmly, before Kale could speak. This is not new behavior for him. You are simply the latest reason he has found to justify it. That does not change the fact that it would stop if I were not here, Ren said. It would not stop, Kale said, his voice hard with certainty. It would only change targets. Cassian has wanted an excuse to expand his territory for a decade. If it were not you, it would be some other justification. Do not carry guilt for ambitions that existed long before you crossed our border. Dorian, who had been studying a map spread across the council table, spoke up before the conversation could continue further. The pattern of these attacks tells us something useful at least. Fallow Creek and the scouting party weeks ago both approached from the southeast. If Cassian is building toward something larger, that is likely the direction it will come from. You think he is planning a direct assault, Kale said. I think he is done being subtle, Dorian replied grimly. Terrorizing villages, testing our patrols, none of that is the behavior of a man planning to wait patiently for an opportunity. It is the behavior of a man building momentum towards something decisive. The council spent the following hours mapping out defensive strategies, reinforcing the southeastern border, coordinating with allied packs who owed Blackthorn favors from past conflicts, preparing for a confrontation that suddenly felt far less hypothetical than it had even a month earlier. Ren, seated at the table now as a recognized member of the discussion rather than an outsider awaiting news, found herself contributing ideas with a confidence that surprised even her, drawing on instincts that felt less like new knowledge and more like buried memory finally surfacing. If he wants me specifically, she said, during a lull in the strategic planning, then perhaps the answer is not simply defending every possible point of attack. Perhaps it is making certain he cannot reach me easily, even if his forces break through. Meaning what exactly? Kale asked. Meaning I should train harder, faster, and be prepared to fight for myself, rather than relying entirely on the pack to shield me from a threat that specifically wants to capture me alive, Ren said. If Cassian's forces do break through, I would rather be capable of surviving that confrontation than counting on rescue that might not arrive in time. Kale's jaw tightened, the protective instinct that had defined so much of his behavior toward her, warring visibly with the respect he held for her judgment. Your training has progressed well, but Cassian's fighters are seasoned, trained for exactly this kind of confrontation. Then train me harder, Ren said simply. I am not asking for guarantees, Kale. I am asking for the chance to be more than something that needs protecting. It was Isolde, unexpectedly, who broke the tension that followed. She is right, brother. And you know it, even if the part of you that cares for her does not want to hear it. Kale exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing, just slightly, as he accepted the argument he could not honestly refute. Dorian, intensify her training. Combat scenarios, not simply control exercises. If confrontation is coming, I want her as prepared as possible. Dorian nodded, already sketching plans in his mind for the weeks ahead. The following month became the most demanding of Ren's new life, training from dawn until well past dusk, learning not just to control her shift, but to fight within it, to anticipate an opponent's movement, to use the environment around her as a weapon, when raw strength alone would not be enough against trained Ashgrave fighters. She trained alongside younger pack members preparing for their own combat trials, earning grudging respect from those who had initially doubted an outsider could match the discipline expected of true Blackthorn wolves. She trained under Dorian's relentless, exacting standards, absorbing correction after correction until movements that once felt foreign became instinctive. And she trained, on the evenings Kale could spare from his mounting responsibilities, alongside him directly, sparring matches that blurred the line between combat practice and something more intimate. An unspoken trust building between them, with every exchange of movement and counter-movement. It was during one such evening session, weeks into the intensified training, that a scout arrived with news that ended, once and for all, any lingering hope that Cassian's ambitions might resolve peacefully. Movement along the southeastern border, the scout reported, breathless from the run back to the castle. Significant numbers, my king. More fighters than I have ever seen assembled outside of Ashgrave territory. They are not scouting anymore. They are massing. Kale's expression, already tense from the evening's training, hardened into the cold, focused resolve of a king preparing for war. How long until they could reach us? He asked. If they move at the pace I observed, 2 days, perhaps 3. The council was assembled within the hour. Every senior member of the pack gathered once more in the great hall, the weight of what was coming, settling over the room, like a physical presence. "This is it," Kale said, addressing the assembled leaders with a calm that Ren recognized now as hard-won discipline, rather than an absence of fear. "Cassian is done waiting. He intends to take by force what he could not obtain through patience. We have 2 days, perhaps 3, to prepare our defenses and our people." Ren stood among the council members, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce determination, and found Kale's gaze meeting hers across the room, steady and certain, despite everything bearing down on them both. Whatever was coming, she would not face it hidden away and helpless. She would face it standing beside him. The 2 days before Cassian's forces arrived passed in a blur of preparation that left no corner of Blackthorn territory untouched. Kale sent riders to every allied pack within reach, calling in favors accumulated over decades of careful diplomacy. Isolde coordinated the evacuation of villages closest to the southeastern border, moving the elderly, the young, and anyone unable to fight into the fortified safety of the castle itself. Dorian drilled the pack's fighters relentlessly, refining formations and strategies that would need to hold against a force reportedly larger than anything Blackthorn had faced in a generation. Ren found herself pulled in a dozen directions at once, assisting with evacuations 1 hour, running combat drills the next, learning the layout of the castle's defensive positions until she could navigate them blindfolded. Sleep became a luxury, measured in fragments rather than hours. And still, somehow, the 2 days felt impossibly short against the scale of what was approaching. On the evening before the allied forces from neighboring packs began arriving, Ren found Kale alone on the castle's highest tower, staring east toward the border where, even now, the first signs of Cassian's advance were beginning to show as distant flickers of torchlight moving through the darkened hills. "You should be resting," she said, echoing words he had once said to her, weeks ago, in a healing chamber that felt impossibly distant now. "I could say the same to you," Kale replied, though a faint smile touched his lips as she settled beside him at the tower's edge. They stood in silence for a while, watching the distant torchlight multiply as more of Cassian's forces became visible against the darkening horizon. "Are you afraid?" Ren asked finally. Kale considered the question with the same careful honesty he had shown her since the beginning. "Yes," he admitted, "not for myself. I have faced battle before, and I know what I am capable of. I am afraid for my people, for the villages that will suffer if our defenses fail. And I am afraid for you, though I know better than to say that where anyone else might hear it, and question whether you are ready for what is coming." "I am ready," Ren said, and found, to her own quiet surprise, that she believed it fully. "Not because I am no longer afraid. I am terrified, if I am honest, but because I refuse to let fear be the reason Cassian succeeds in whatever he intends to do to me, or to the people who have become my family in these past months." Kale turned to face her fully, something fierce and tender both crossing his expression at once. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I need you to know that finding you in that forest was not a burden placed on me by some old legend I did not fully understand. It was the beginning of everything that has made these past months matter more than the previous 3 centuries combined." Ren reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his, the gesture simple, but carrying the weight of everything neither of them had time to say fully, before the battle that would determine both their futures arrived at their doorstep. "Then let's make certain there is a tomorrow worth having," she said. By mid-morning the following day, the allied forces Kale had summoned began arriving in earnest, packs from territories bordering Blackthorn land, answering the call for support, with numbers that, while still smaller than what scouts reported approaching from the southeast, at least offered a fighting chance rather than certain defeat. The defensive line formed along the ridge overlooking the southeastern approach, Blackthorn fighters and their allies arranged in formations Dorian had drilled relentlessly over the previous days, archers positioned on higher ground, the strongest fighters held in reserve for the moment the true assault began, rather than exhausted defending initial skirmishes. Ren stood among the pack's fighters, her silver coat catching the pale morning light, Kale's massive black form positioned beside her at the center of the formation. close enough that she could feel the steady, controlled power radiating from him even through the tension gripping the entire assembled force. Cassian's army came into view shortly before noon, a dark mass of wolves and armed fighters spreading across the valley floor below the ridge, numbers that made even the most experienced Blackthorn warriors tense visibly at the sight. At the front of the approaching force, larger than any wolf Ren had yet seen, moved a massive form the color of rust and shadow, and she understood immediately, without needing to be told, that this was Cassian himself, Alpha of the Ashgrave Pack, the man whose ambition had cost her the life and memories she could not recall, and threatened everything the Blackthorn Pack had built over 3 centuries. Kale's wolf let out a low, warning growl that rippled through the assembled defenders like a current, a sound that carried across the valley clearly enough that Cassian's forces paused briefly at the edge of the ridge below. For a long moment, the two forces simply stared across the distance separating them, the tension so thick it felt tangible, the fate of everything Ren had come to love hanging in the balance of whatever happened in the moments that followed. Then, without warning or ceremony, Cassian's forces surged forward, and the battle for Blackthorn territory began in earnest. The clash of 2 armies moving toward each other across open ground was a sound Ren would never forget, a rising wave of movement and noise that swallowed every individual thought the moment the 2 forces met along the ridge. She fought instinctively, exactly as Dorian had trained her, staying low, using speed rather than force to slip past fighters larger and more experienced than herself, focusing on protecting the wounded defenders, rather than seeking confrontations she was not yet equipped to win outright. Twice she pulled injured Blackthorn fighters clear of the worst of the fighting, dragging them back toward the healers stationed safely behind the main line, her heart pounding with an adrenaline that left little room for the fear that should have overwhelmed her entirely. Kale fought at the center of the formation, a force of controlled devastation that scattered every fighter foolish enough to challenge him directly. His focus split constantly between the battle unfolding around him and the silver shape moving through the chaos that he refused to lose sight of for more than a few seconds at a time. It was Isolde who first spotted the second wave. "They're flanking," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise of battle, as a second group of Ashgrave fighters emerged from the tree line to the north, clearly intending to strike the defensive line from an unprotected angle, while the main force held Blackthorn's attention along the ridge. Dorian rallied a group of reserve fighters immediately, moving to intercept the flanking force before it could reach the vulnerable rear positions where the wounded and the youngest fighters had been stationed. Ren found herself pulled into that response instinctively, racing alongside Dorian's group toward the emerging threat. The flanking fighters were fewer in number, but fresh, unworn by the fighting already consuming the main battle line, and the confrontation that followed was fierce and fast, a chaotic scramble of movement that tested every lesson Ren had absorbed over the past months of training. She was holding her own against a fighter nearly twice her size, when she caught, from the corner of her vision, a smaller group breaking away from the flanking force entirely, moving with clear purpose, not toward the main battle, but directly toward the castle itself, toward the villagers and children who had been evacuated there for safety. Understanding hit her with sudden cold clarity. This was not simply a flanking maneuver meant to overwhelm the defensive line. It was a diversion, cover for a smaller group, intending to breach the castle directly while the pack's fighters remained occupied elsewhere. She broke from her confrontation, calling out a warning that was lost in the noise of the surrounding chaos, and made a decision in an instant that she knew, even as she made it, would determine everything. She ran for the castle. Alone, faster than she had ever moved before, her silver form a blur across the churned ground separating the battle line from the castle walls, Ren reached the outer gate just as the small group of Ashgrave fighters began forcing their way through the defenses left behind to guard the evacuated civilians. What happened next unfolded faster than conscious thought could fully track. Ren threw herself into the confrontation without hesitation, placing her body between the intruding fighters and the terrified villagers sheltering behind the gate, drawing on every instinct her months of training had built and something else besides, something deeper, older, that seemed to surge up from the very core of the bloodline she had only recently learned she carried. The power that had been building beneath the surface since the moment Elric first identified the ancient markers in her blood chose that exact moment to fully awaken, a surge of strength and speed that felt less like learned skill and more like inheritance, finally claiming its rightful place. Ancient power passed down through generations, finally recognizing the crisis it had been waiting for. She moved through the small group of attackers with a ferocity that startled even herself, not seeking to cause lasting harm but to disable, to protect, to hold the line long enough for reinforcements to arrive, and hold it she did, standing alone at the gate until Isolde and a group of fighters, alerted by a young guard who had witnessed Ren's desperate sprint toward the castle, arrived to finish securing the breach. By the time the last of the intruding fighters had been subdued and disarmed, Ren stood at the gate, breathing hard, exhausted beyond anything she had experienced, even in the most grueling training sessions, but the villagers behind her remained safe, untouched, protected entirely by a stand she had made without a second thought for her own safety. "You held the gate alone," Isolde said, arriving beside her, disbelief and pride warring in her expression as she took in the scene. "Against 5 trained fighters, alone." "I didn't have time to wait for help," Ren said, still catching her breath. "The battle. Kale, is he?" "The main line is holding," Isolde said quickly. "Cassian's forces are beginning to falter without their planned diversion succeeding. Come, we need to get back to the ridge." They returned to find the tide of the larger battle beginning, slowly, to turn in Blackthorn's favor, the failure of the flanking maneuver having cost Cassian's forces both momentum and numbers they could not easily replace. Kale, spotting Ren's return across the battlefield, felt something in his chest loosen, with a relief so profound, it nearly broke his concentration entirely. But the battle was not yet finished, and Cassian himself, having watched his carefully planned assault begin to unravel, turned his attention directly toward the Blackthorn King, clearly intent on ending the conflict through single, decisive combat, rather than accepting the growing likelihood of defeat. The 2 alphas met at the center of the ridge, the fighting around them gradually pausing, as both sides recognized the significance of the confrontation unfolding, understanding instinctively that whatever happened between their 2 leaders would determine far more than the immediate battle. Ren watched, helpless to intervene directly, as Kale and Cassian circled each other with the deadly precision of 2 apex predators who had spent their entire lives training for exactly this kind of confrontation, every movement calculated, every feint tested against decades of experience on both sides. It was, in the end, not raw strength but the accumulated weight of everything that had changed in Kale over the previous months that tipped the confrontation in his favor. Where once his fighting had been driven purely by discipline and calculation, now it carried something more, a fierce, protective purpose, fueled by everything he had to lose, everything standing behind him watching, everything Ren's presence in his life had given him reason to fight for, beyond simple territorial pride. The confrontation ended swiftly, decisively, Cassian forced into submission before the assembled forces of both packs, his ambitions for Blackthorn territory and for the ancient bloodline he had hunted so relentlessly finally, completely broken. A cheer rose from the Blackthorn line and their allies, relief and triumph mixing together, as Cassian's remaining forces, seeing their alpha defeated, began retreating in scattered disarray, back toward their own territory. Ren crossed the battlefield toward Kale, who had shifted back to human form, exhausted but victorious, and when he saw her approaching, whole and unharmed, despite everything that had happened at the castle gate, something in his expression broke open completely, every careful restraint he had maintained over the centuries, finally giving way entirely. "You held the gate," he said, pulling her into an embrace that spoke more clearly than any words could have managed. "Alone, against trained fighters, while I fought here believing you were safe within the walls." "I couldn't let them reach the children," Ren said simply. "There wasn't a choice to make. There was only what needed to be done." Kale pulled back just enough to look at her fully, pride and relief and something deeper, something that had been building steadily, since the moment his wolf first knelt in that forest, so many months ago, written plainly across his face. 3 centuries, he said quietly, 3 centuries, and I never once believed anyone could stand beside me, the way you have these past months. I was wrong to ever doubt it was possible. Around them, the battlefield began the slow process of tending to the wounded, of gathering the fallen, of beginning the long work of recovery that always followed conflict of this scale. But at the center of it all, Kale and Ren stood together, victorious not simply over Cassian's ambitions, but over every doubt that had once made such a bond seem impossible. The weeks following the battle brought a kind of peace Blackthorn territory had not known in years. The immediate threat of Cassian's ambitions finally, thoroughly dismantled, the surrounding villages beginning the slow work of rebuilding what had been damaged during the conflict. Cassian himself, stripped of his authority over the Ashgrave Pack by his own council, in the aftermath of such a decisive and public defeat, retreated into obscurity, his ambitions for power finally, permanently broken by the very confrontation he had engineered to secure them. The Ashgrave territory settled under new, more measured leadership within the month, one far less inclined toward the aggressive expansion that had defined the previous years of tension along the border. Ren spent those weeks dividing her time between continued training, now less about survival and more about mastering abilities she was still discovering within herself, and the slower, gentler work of settling fully into a life she could scarcely have imagined during those first disoriented days when she woke, memoryless and afraid, in an unfamiliar castle. Her memories never fully returned, not in the complete way she had once hoped, though fragments surfaced occasionally, quiet flashes of a life before the forest that Elric believed she might never recover entirely, the trauma of whatever had happened before her collapse at Blackthorn's border, having sealed those memories away perhaps permanently. But rather than the loss defining her, as she had once feared it would, Ren found herself grateful, in a strange and unexpected way, for the chance to build something new, rather than carrying forward whatever pain had marked the life she could no longer remember. It was Isolde, months after the battle, who first raised the subject that would define the next chapter of Blackthorn's history. "The pack has been talking," she said, finding Ren in the castle's private courtyard one quiet evening, the same courtyard where Ren had first learned what she truly was. "About what happened at the gate. About the bloodline Elric identified. About everything you have done to earn your place here." "Talking about what, specifically?" Ren asked, though something in Isolde's careful tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "About whether Blackthorn territory has been missing something these past 3 centuries, Isolde said. "A king ruling alone, however capable, is still only half of what the old traditions once considered complete leadership. There are records, old ones, describing a time when alpha kings ruled alongside partners, equally recognized by the pack, sharing authority, rather than holding it entirely alone." Ren's breath caught. "You're talking about Kale." "I am talking about both of you," Isolde said. "The pack has watched you these past months, Ren. They watched you train relentlessly to protect people who were strangers to you, only a season ago. They watched you hold the castle gate, alone, against trained fighters, rather than wait safely for rescue. And they watched my brother, a man who has spent 300 years, refusing to bow to anyone, finally understand what it means to have someone worth kneeling for." That evening, Kale found Ren in the same courtyard, watching the last light of sunset fade behind the eastern hills, where, months ago, danger had once gathered on the horizon, and now only peace remained. "Isolde spoke to you," he said, settling beside her. "She did. And what do you think? About what she suggested?" Ren turned to face him fully. Months of shared danger and growing trust settled into a certainty she felt in every part of herself, memory or no memory, bloodline or no bloodline. "I think," she said slowly, "that I came into this territory as a stranger who did not even know her own name, and I have found, since then, more purpose and belonging than I could have imagined possible. I think your wolf recognized something in me before either of us understood it fully, and I think 3 centuries of tradition were simply waiting for the right reason to change." Kale reached for her hand, the same gesture that had marked so many quiet, meaningful moments between them since that first conversation in his study. "Then let us give them that reason," he said. The ceremony that followed, weeks later, drew members from every allied pack across the territory, a celebration unlike anything Blackthorn land had witnessed in generations. Ren stood before the assembled crowd, Kale beside her, as Isolde, acting as the pack's eldest voice of tradition, spoke the old words that had not been spoken aloud in over 3 centuries, words recognizing not simply a king's chosen partner, but an equal, a queen in every sense the old traditions had once intended. When Kale knelt before her that day, publicly, deliberately, before the assembled crowd of both packs, It carried an entirely different meaning than the instinctive, startled submission that had first brought him to his knees in a forest months earlier. This kneeling was a choice, made with full understanding and complete certainty. A king, honoring the woman who had earned every measure of the authority now being formally recognized beside his own. "Rise as my equal," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, "and rule this land beside me, not because instinct demanded it, but because I have watched you earn it, every single day since the moment I found you." Ren, her eyes bright with emotion she made no effort to hide, reached down and helped him to his feet, the crowd erupting into celebration around them as the two stood together, hand in hand, before a pack that had fully, wholeheartedly embraced the woman who had arrived among them as a stranger, and become, through courage and determination rather than birthright alone, exactly the leader their territory had needed. Later that evening, away from the celebration still continuing in the great hall, Kale and Ren stood once more on the tower, where they had watched Cassian's forces gather on the horizon so many months before. The view tonight held nothing but peaceful darkness, stars scattered across a clear sky, the territory below settled and safe. "Do you ever think about it?" Ren asked quietly. "That first moment, when your wolf knelt before you even knew who I was?" "Every day," Kale admitted. "I spent 3 centuries believing that strength meant never bending, never needing anyone beside me to rule effectively. It took a wounded, memoryless stranger appearing at my border to teach me how wrong that belief had been. And now?" "Now," Kale said, drawing her close against him as they looked out over the territory they would rule together. "I understand that the strongest thing I ever did as king was not refusing to kneel for 300 years. It was finally recognizing, the moment it truly mattered, exactly when kneeling was not weakness at all, but the beginning of everything worth having." Below them, the territory of Blackthorn settled into peaceful night, a king and his equal watching over land that had, at long last, found the balance it had been missing for 300 years, built not on old pride alone, but on a bond neither of them had expected, and both of them had come, fully and completely, to cherish.